Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be reading through and translating a really fascinating part of the Beowulf poem from chapter 8, and it is essentially Hunferth's long speech in Heorot, Hrothgar's hall, when Beowulf and his soldiers have arrived. Hrothgar is feasting them, and you know, everyone is speaking very highly of Beowulf, and then Hunferth, whose name means unafraid in Old English, it's sort of a pun here, stands up and delivers this scathing invective against this hero Beowulf, who is otherwise beloved by everybody else in the hall. And I'm going to be titling this video something like Beowulf's Toxic Masculinity, because this speech is essentially Hunferth sort of calling out Beowulf for valuing his own masculine performance to such an extent that he risks his own life and the life of his kinsman over choosing a sort of less glorious life with home and hearth when in the pursuit of this vainglory, essentially. And I'm not going to be making the argument that the text is sort of critiquing toxic masculinity, because as we'll see, the text very obviously and deliberately undermines Hunferth's motivations in saying this. But it is nonetheless very interesting in that through Hunferth's speech we get to see this sort of alternative, almost like attempt at a less violent style of masculinity in early medieval Scandinavia, and we get to see, with some references also to other aspects of early medieval English literature, such as Alfred's colloquy on the occupations, we can see sort of emerging masculinities, different masculinities, rather than a single hegemonic masculinity, which Beowulf himself might embody. And very quickly, just so that we get this out of the way, when I say toxic masculinity here, I'm referring to behaviors which are coded as masculine, which are harmful to the men themselves who perform them. So in this case, Hunferth's argument is that Beowulf went out to sea and risked his life and the life of his friend in order to prove how manly he was, and that therefore he is incurring expense that is unnecessary in the name of masculinity. So that's what I mean when I say toxic masculinity here. It doesn't mean that masculine aesthetics are intrinsically bad, or that being a man or male is bad. I obviously don't think that. So without further ado, let's read the speech. Unferth mathalode, edlafes bearn, the at fortum sat frean schildinga, onmand beodurune, was him Beowulf sydd, morius merlefardan Mitchell aftunga. For thon the he neuthe that any other man after Martha thon ma midden years je hedde und helfenum thonne he silfa. So what does this mean? Hunferth mathalde. Hunferth spoke, and again remember his name basically means unafraid. Edglaf as Bearn, the son of Edglaf. They at fortum sat Frean Schildinga, who sat at the feet of the Lord of the Schildings. This is, of course, referring to Hrothgar. Onband Beorurdune, he unburdened his Beorurdune is really interesting. This sort of like secret quarrel. This so Beordu probably is coming from the stem Balu, meaning like battle or conflict, and then Rune is from Runa, which means a sort of secret hidden discourse. So Beordu means his sort of hidden quarrel, like this sort of enmity towards Beowulf that he has in his own head, and now he's unbundling it, he's showing it to everybody in the hall. But just a quick thing about the ad fortum here. Sitting at the feet of Hrothgar, this perhaps is drawing in some sort of Christian imagery of Christ, say, trampling on the serpent, because you'll remember that in the Christian mythos, the reason for Satan's expulsion from heaven is that he himself tried to become God and believed that he could be greater than God. And this is exactly Hunferth's motivation here, as we'll see later on, except rather than a divine, it's more of a terrestrial glory that Hunferth is seeking to usurp. So I think the text here, which bear in mind is being written down by Christian monks, even if it probably comes from a pre-Christian past, and is certainly set in a pre-Christian past, they are sort of echoing Christian symbolism by placing Hunferth, this sort of disgruntled employee, let's say, of Hrothgar, at his feet, like in the same way that the serpent would be under Christ's feet. So he's sitting at the feet of the king and he unleashes his secret quarrel. And then the Beowulf poet gives us a sentence of explanation, of narration, and this is comparatively rare. I don't believe there are that many moments in the text where the Beowulf poet actually intervenes to interpret what a person is about to do or say and explain this is why. And I think part of the reason why the Beowulf poet is doing this here is because Hunferth is challenging the notions of hegemonic masculinity, which are otherwise taken for granted in this text. Up until this point, the performance of male characters in proving themselves through violence, as an example, is just uncritically accepted as the good way for a society to be organized. And for the first time here, Hunferth is saying, no, I disagree with that. And so the Beowulf poet, who I think, with some reservations, agrees with the mead hall society relying on masculine heroes to protect it, this poet nonetheless therefore has to undermine Hunferth's message because he doesn't want the idea of this society to be so fundamentally challenged. And that's why we get the sentence which says, Was him Beowulf sydd, Modius Merlefaran Michel Afthunka. So Sydd Beowulf is the journey of Beowulf, Modius Merlefaran, of the proud seafarer, was for him, for Hunferth, Michel Afthunka. It was a great disgrace, an inconvenience, a bother for him. For thon the he neuthe, because he wished not that any other man after Martha thon ma midden jerde hede. So he wished not that any other man would ever heed Jehede. Martha thon ma, greater fame, basically. Under heavenum, under the heavens, thonne he silver, than himself. So what this is saying is that Hunferth stands up and he's about to give the speech. The Beowulf poet comes in and says he's only giving the speech out of jealousy because he doesn't want anybody in Middle-earth to have greater fame than himself. Now, the key thing here are the words which I believe Beowulf himself says, something to the effect of wise is the warrior who can discern the difference between words and deeds. And my personal inclination and understanding is that the Beowulf poet believes that Beowulf's boasts are justified because they represent his deeds, right? The warcum and wericum. So his works match up with his deeds, whereas Hunferth doesn't really have those, at least it's implied that he doesn't, and therefore he has to resort to using his words to try to detriment or to tear down Beowulf's reputation just a bit, although, as we will see in future videos, he's very unsuccessful at this. Hunferth does not come out of this looking particularly good. So this is the start of Hunferth's speech. This is what he's saying to the Danes. Ert thu, say Beowulf, say them with brechan wunne, on sidne sa sundflite, thar yit for blenche wada kunnedon, for doljilpe on der water aldron neithdon. So he addresses Beowulf directly. Ert thu, say Beowulf, are you the Beowulf? Say thou with brechan wunne, the man who struggled against Breca. On sidne sa, on the wide sea, sund, near the ocean. Tharit forblence wada kunidon. In that place where you too, yit, because remember Old English has a dual, so we can actually say you too with just a single word. Tharit forblence wada kunidon. You experience the waves, or the waves, for Walentia, just for pride, for the sake of pride, on for doljilpe, and for a foolish boast, on deop water aldrum neithdon. You risked neithdon aldrum, your lives, your souls, on deop water, on deep water. Now, it's not entirely clear what this contest actually is, but the association of them doing it out at sea is actually pretty interesting for a good many reasons. In no small part because at the beginning of the poem, when Shaving dies, the Beowulf poet narrates how he is sent on Flores Achte into the dominion of the sea, of the ocean, and likewise Beowulf is buried at the end of the poem and sent out to ocean. So there seems to be this idea that the ocean, the water, the sea is a place where these pagan warriors go to get glory. And this is one of those things, like many aspects of the Beowulf poem, which is ambiguous enough that it could have made sense from a Christian perspective also, because many Christian texts at the time, such as the anonymous Vita's Patrum, describe hell in little anecdotes as being watery, underwater, under the ocean, etc. Certainly cold and wet, which has, as we'll remember from other videos on this channel, hopefully feminine implications. So what I'm saying is that this notion of the pagan heroes going out into water to prove themselves might have some kind of religious implications of them venturing away from civilized society, away from Christianity, into the sort of untamed nature of the ocean where they are in the dominion of pagan gods. So this could be an element of criticism here. Not by the way, criticism that Hunferth himself is saying, because of course Hunferth and Beowulf, they were, before Christianity came to these lands, they would not have known about Christ. But I'm saying that in the eyes of a medieval audience, they might have understood the symbolism of Beowulf and Brecha going out into the ocean as going out into territory which is more likely to be the domain of devils, because there are many references in Christian literature to hell being a place in the ocean. And we can sort of see a reference to this in Alfred's colloquy on the occupations, where when the monk takes his students around and has them talk to the villagers about their different occupations, they talk to the fisherman, and the fisherman is asked by one of the monastic boys, "Have you ever caught a whale?" And the fisherman replies, "I am not so brave, so daring that I would venture to catch a whale, because it can sort of sink my boat with just one flick of its tail and lose the lives of many men. So I would rather catch smaller fish and not risk losing my life." So we see in this text a similar association, right? Instead, the fisherman in Alfred's colloquy is essentially doing what Hunferth would recommend and not going out onto the ocean and engaging in this masculine contest of physical strength to pursue the greater glory of catching a whale, because he's choosing to value the life of a hearth and home and of civilization over these masculine contests out in this ocean, which is potentially associated with pagan forces and with hell. And I suspect that the fact that Alfred's colloquy is explicitly a monastic text written for a monastic audience by a monastic, composed by a monastic, Alfred of Evesham himself, this might explain why this fisherman's refusal to engage in the pursuit of hegemonic masculinity in the way that Beowulf does is actually not critiqued in the colloquy. It's rewarded. This is viewed as a good thing. The fisherman is sensible for not risking his life, whereas Hunferth getting up and criticizing Beowulf for risking his life is framed by the poem as an act of jealousy. It's framed almost like as a reflection of Hunferth's own cowardice, etc. And Beowulf is seen as heroic and masculine for having risked his life in this manner. So we can see a great difference from the more secular texts of Beowulf, how the pursuit of hegemonic masculinity, even when it is toxic in nature, is praised by the text, versus Alfred's colloquy, where a very similar kind of maritime contest is framed as undesirable to engage in just for the sake of a dolyp, of a sort of vain boast. So I've been rambling a lot, I'm sorry. We should actually look at what Hunferth himself says. So remember, this is after he just calls out Beowulf for risking his life for nothing. Ne inch animon, ne leof ne lath belean michte sorgful nesith, thaiton sundreon, tharid eagostream ermon thechton, maton merestrata, mundum brugdon, glidon over garthedge, geofon ithum whale, wintris wilmum. So, ne inch animon ne leof ne lath belean michte sorgful nesith. Animon, any man, ink, you two, ne leof ne lath, neither a beloved man nor an enemy, belean michte, was able to dissuade you or to prohibit the sorgfulness, that sorrowful journey, thayit onsund reon, when you rowed out to sea. Thariet gorstream ermum thecton, there where you sort of enfolded the gorstream, the ocean, with your arms. Maton merestrata, you measured or you crossed the sea streets or the sea paths. Mundum bructon, you sort of brandished with your hands, essentially. This is referring probably to rowing, which is why I suspect that this was a swimming contest where Beowulf and Blech were maybe seeing how fast or how long each of them could swim. Glidon over Garthedge, you glid over the ocean. Gear von Ithum whale, the sea welled with waves, Wintereth Wilmum, with the wellings of winter. And there is so much stuff that can be said about here. One of the most important things to be said here is, of course, that Beowulf engaging in this maritime contest of strength, this seemingly the swimming contest with Brecha, this sort of foreshadows his ability to enter into watery dominions such as Beowulf's mother's lair, passing through the fens, and also the dragon's lair, which is implied to be in a sort of watery place. So this is foreshadowing how Beowulf is able to go into these watery places as a man and come out victorious and not be sunk into the water there. And this bit at the start where Unferth is emphasizing that nobody, whether beloved or hated, could dissuade them from their journey, is perhaps reminding Beowulf that going out to sea in these ways risks severing the connections with friends and family, which we know were very emotionally important to the early medieval English medieval society, because we see in numerous poems, such as The Wanderer and The Seafarer, how the emotional relationship between a thane and their lord was extremely important. So risking that relationship by risking one's own life out at sea for the sake of one's own glory is being framed here as bad. So Hunferth is essentially pitting two different values of the Mead Hall Society against each other. On the one hand, the Mead Hall Society says that it is very good to pursue glory and to pursue your individual fame, particularly by engaging in these contests which show how powerful and manly you are. And the reason the Mead Hall Society wants to do this is because, as the whole Beowulf poem is about, these individual masculine heroes are necessary to protect the Mead Hall Society from the attacks by those whom it has exiled in the past, whether those are human or monstrous figures. So, on the one hand, that is good and necessary, that pursuit of hegemonic masculine status through violence. But on the other hand, the cultivation of a relationship, particularly that between lord and thane, but also between kinsmen, is very emotionally important. And so much Old English literature attests to the terrible psychological damage that is brought about to people in this time when that relationship is severed. So Hunferth is essentially saying that we should value, or the medieval society should value the emotive value of their relationship more than this sort of political esteeming of hegemonic masculinity. And that is why he is mentioning that the loved ones who may be left behind or who may be hurt by Beowulf risking his life in this manner. And then Hunferth goes on to say, Yet on waters acht sail von nicht swunkon. You guys toiled at sea, again, on waters acht, in the water's dominion. And remember how I said earlier that shield shaving was sent into Florisacht, into the dominion of the sea. So by echoing grammatically the same construct which was used for shield shaving was sent on Florisacht, into the dominion of the sea. Beowulf and Brecha, they go on Watrasacht, the same exact construction, preposition, genitive, and then accusative. So I think what this is doing is, again, evoking and implying the risk, because people listening to that story would remember, oh yes, in the first part of this poem, that same rhythm of on so-and-so acht, on Flores acht, on Watres acht, and they would remember, so even maybe just subconsciously remember, oh yeah, that's where shield shaving went to die, that's where the pagans go to die, so this is a place of danger, basically. And then he says that they toiled sehr von nicht. Now, the use of the number 7 here is pretty interesting. It could be a sort of Christological reference to the creation of the world, but I don't fully understand what it would be doing there in that sense. It could be a reference to this idea of this contest standing in as an experience of all the kinds of contests that a person might endure, right? Because the entire earth was created in 7 days, well, of course, with God resting on the seventh, and everything being created in 7 days, meaning perhaps, by contrast, that with Beowulf and Brecha, I guess, engaging in this contest out at sea for 7 whole days, that itself might imply that they experience, while out at sea, everything that a manly warrior might need to endure. And perhaps, therefore, then this number 7 is foreshadowing that Beowulf is able to overcome any challenge that might be presented to him, including, in the end, the dragon. So, you guys toiled in the water's dominion for 7 nights. Hey they at Sunda overflod. So this hey is referring to Breca because, of course, Beowulf is the addressee of this poem. So Breca, they, you, at Sunda, on the ocean, overflod, he overcame you. Hafte marden magen, he had greater power. Thahine on morgentid on herder ramas holm up atbar. So then Holm, the sea or the ocean, hine, him, on morgentid, in the morning, on herder ramas up atbar. So the syntax here is quite complicated, but what this line is saying is, Breca was beating you out at sea. He had greater strength than you, but then the ocean sort of, bore him up in the morning into among the Heatho-reams, and this is referring to a sort of tribe of early medieval Scandinavia, which I do not know at all about. But what this is sort of implying is that Breca was actually beating Beowulf, according to Hunferth, at least his account of the events, and then Beowulf got lucky, and the sea, who has dominion over both of them, it just sort of took Breca away and left Beowulf standing, so it made it look as if Beowulf had the victory, but actually, in reality, Breca had the greater strength than Beowulf. So what Hunferth is doing in these lines is really interesting. He's sort of challenging the assumption of the Mead Hall of the ocean being a neutral place where these masculine men can test their strength. And remember, these like men, particularly in the Greco-Roman sense of it, being read as dry and hot, going out into a feminine coded space, the ocean, which is cold and wet, right? So this seems like the perfect place to demonstrate one's masculinity. It's exact opposites, right? So only the men who are hottest and the driest, in a sense, would be able to endure a contest of strength out on the ocean. But Hunferth is challenging how suitable the ocean actually is as a neutral testing ground for this. So he's really challenging some of the key assumptions that the Mead Hall Society is going off of here and how they measure masculinity, because he is saying, Hunferth, that actually the ocean was the one who unfairly decided the victor, because when the ocean was still, Breca was beating Beowulf in the swimming contest because he had greater strength. But then the sea just like swallowed Breca up unfairly and spat him out on the Heather Sea. So he's turned the ocean into a sort of unjust arbiter. And so he's maybe locating true strength in some other dominion of performance where maybe Hunferth does better. So maybe Hunferth himself wasn't good at these sea contests, but perhaps Hunferth was better at contests on land, and this might be why he's emphasizing, or rather, I should say, devaluing the fairness of these contests out at sea, because he's saying, hey, look, this ocean, which remember we're going to be reading as potentially demonic coded, this ocean might suddenly just decide arbitrarily who the victor is, even if that person doesn't deserve to win. And that's what we're getting in this line. So it doesn't seem like it's a very strong critique. It seems like he's just recounting how the sea washed Breca up on the shore. But actually, there's a lot going on here in these few lines. But then Hunferth sort of esteems Breca essentially for knowing when to quit, because he says this: Thonon hei isochte swasne eidel, leof his leodum, Lond brandinga, vredo burg feire, thar hei folk achte burg on bergas. So, from being washed up on the heather rims, Hunferth says how Thonon hei isochte swasne eidel. From there, he sought his sweet homeland, and this image of Breca seeking his homeland echoes many poems that we have in Old English literature, such as Deo, the Seafarer, the Wanderer, which describe exiled warriors longing to return to their homeland. Sometimes that homeland is described as destroyed, sometimes it's described as far away. There's all sorts of things, but it's evoking a very common trope within early medieval English literature. And so Breca sought it, Leof his leodom, beloved by his people. So this is, I think, serving as both a result and an explanation of Breca's actions. So Hunferth can at the same time both be saying that Breca was beloved by his people because he sought to return to them when he was washed up, rather than continuing to fight against Beowulf on the sea to try to prove his strength. So he knew when it wasn't worth continuing and when to value his relationships with his kinsmen at home more. So that's one explanation of it. And it can also be that he sought his homeland again because he was beloved by his people and he valued that love more than continuing to seek vainglory in a contest with Beowulf. So he sought the Lond Brondinga, he sought the land of the Brondings, and the Brondings again are another Scandinavian tribe, which I have no idea about. Sorry. Vredeburg Feire, he sought the fair free city. Thar hei folk achte, where he owned the people. So this is saying that Breca was a sort of petty king of some kind, regulus, to use the Venerable Bede's Latin term for it. He owned the people, the burg, the fortified town or the fortification, and bergas, and the rings. And I need to quickly say it, as I always do when I talk about Beowulf. Tolkien just stole so much from Old English literature and Beowulf in particular, and the exact phrase, the Lord of the Rings, Hringathrethl, it appears 3 times within the text of Beowulf. And there are lots of times when this word bearer, which is sometimes translated as crown or armband or various things, but it really just means a ring, and you can translate it as ring. So when these kings are giving out rings for everybody, you see the symbolism here, you see how it all ties into Tolkien in a really cool way, and we can sort of read the events of Beowulf as almost like, about a quest to become Lord of the Rings. It's really cool. Anyway, moving on to the next bit, or to the final bit of Hunferth's invective against Beowulf. So, Beat eil with they, sunu Bernsdanes saw the elaste. Thonna weine ich to they words an je thingia, ferchthu herdo rasa je hwar dochte, grimmer guthe, je fu grenles dears nicht long ne first nean bidan. So, what does this mean? So, Beat eil with they, sunu Bernsdanes saw the elaste. So the son of Beanstone, literally, I don't know what significance that's going to have, saw the Elaste, he truly fulfilled Beot El, all of his boast with Thay against you. So this is pretty interesting. So Hunverth is implying that there were boasts made at the beginning of their challenge. Hunberth and Brecker presumably both said something like, I am the manliest manly man, I will be able to swim the fastest, blah blah blah. And then they went out to sea and they swam for 7 days. You know the rest. And what happened in the contest is that Brecker was swallowed up by the waves and spat out on the shore of the Heatheremes, and he had to wander his way back home because he gave up at that point and decided to value his home over vainglory in a contest with Beowulf. Now, Hunverth is saying that Brecker actually did fulfill the entirety of his boast towards Beowulf. So, Hunverth, the only thing that Hunverth can really mean by this is saying that even though you, Beowulf, think that you won the contest because you were able to swim at sea the longest, Brecker was the one who actually won it. He actually was better, and he came true on his word that he said to you. And he's using this to set up the final stinger in his invective, which he's going to use to undermine the Hall's trust in Beowulf's power, because then he says, Thonawaina ich tothe wirsanyatinja. Then I think it'll go worse for you. Theach thu herðorrasa yehwardochte. Even though you endured the battle rushes, the attacks elsewhere, and you endured the grimraguthe, the grim battle. If thu grenlis dears nicht long first neana bidan. So, if you dare to await Grendel, because Bidan takes the genitive as its object, so if you dare await Grendel nearby nicht long first for a whole night span, basically, because Hunferth is saying this to Beowulf after he has come to Heorot and promised them that he is going to liberate them from the monster Grendel. Now, this is a boast. Beowulf has been boasting that he is going to cleanse the Hall of Heorot. And Hunferth is saying that Brecker actually fulfilled his oath. You didn't fulfill your oath, Beowulf, because as I'm telling it, you actually lost in that contest out at sea because this demonic coded sea unfairly decided who the winner would be, and Brecker made the smarter choice. And therefore, you, Beowulf, don't actually keep to your boasts. You don't fulfill your boasts. And so this boast that you've just told to the Hall of Heorot that you're going to protect them from Grendel is also false. You're also going to lose. And he says, even though you've endured battles before, I think because I have said that you do not fulfill your boasts, that it's going to go worse for you this time if you dare to stay here during the night and await Grendel's attack on the hall. So this is the end of Hunferth's speech, where he's gotten up, and as we can see, he's gone through and actually with pretty economic language has challenged Beowulf's actions, calling him out for what we would nowadays call toxic masculinity, and he's really challenging some of the fundamental values which the medieval society is based on, and offering a sort of alternative vision of masculine performance, which esteems emotional relationships with one's friends and family more so than these sort of demonstrations of physical strength and martial prowess. So it's a really fascinating little speech within the text of Beowulf, and I hope I've done a good job of showing how it ties into some of other aspects that we see in medieval texts. So we can see that this isn't entirely out of thin cloth as well. This isn't unique to the Beowulf poem, but we can see similar elements of this echoed in Alfred's colloquy on the occupations and in poems such as The Wanderer and The Seafarer. So there we go. That was long and fun. Now, I said at the beginning that the poet very much undermines Hunferth's saying this, and he says that Hunferth is only saying this out of jealousy, and this is true. And then Beowulf himself then stands up and gives a speech of his own, cutting down Hunferth for this. But that will be a video for another time. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want me to teach you Old English or any of the other languages that I do on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video. You can also join my Discord server, where we have lots of fun discussions about historical literature and languages. It's great fun. You should come and join us. And until next time, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day. Bye, everyone.